In WWE, every match is a story told through sweat, skill, and a deep respect for the audience. But things don't always go according to script. There have been moments when wrestlers, driven by ego, frustration, or personal conflict, deliberately sabotaged a match live on air. And those acts of betrayal didn't just derail the match itself, they left behind lasting stains on WWE's legacy that are hard to forget. Shawn Michaels vs. Hulk Hogan, when a match turned into a comedy show. If we had to pick one of the most infamous matches in WWE history, the clash between Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam 2005 would undoubtedly top the list. Not just because two legends went head-to-head, but because of how it ended, or more accurately, how it was derailed by oversized egos. The original plan called for a two-match storyline. Hogan would take the win in their first encounter at SummerSlam, with Michaels getting his payback in a rematch later on. On paper, it was a fair trade. But Hogan didn't see it that way. Despite having agreed beforehand, Hogan unexpectedly backed out of the second match. He cited an injury, but most insiders, and even Michaels himself, weren't buying it. After all, Hogan had a long history of refusing to give back to opponents like Bret Hart, Jeff Jarrett, Randy Orton, and even the Ultimate Warrior. Hogan's reputation had long been tied to his unwillingness to elevate others, instead always prioritizing his own image. When Michaels realized that the follow-up match was off the table and he would be the one lying down in a one-sided bout, he didn't protest. He didn't walk away either. Instead, he chose a bold and calculated form of retaliation, turning the match into an over-the-top farce. Throughout the bout, Shawn oversold every move with ridiculous exaggeration. Wild bumps, absurd rolling, and theatrical flailing meant to mock every single one of Hogan's strikes. While Hogan played it straight with his usual stern demeanor, Michaels seemed like he was auditioning for a comedy skit in the middle of the ring. The crowd reaction was split. Some laughed and saw it as bizarre entertainment. Others felt betrayed, having expected an epic showdown but getting a circus instead. Hogan, without a doubt, fell into the latter category, reportedly furious at how Shawn overdid everything and disrespected the original agreement. When later asked about what happened, Michaels denied trying to sabotage the match. He claimed he was simply playing the heel role, just like he did back in the 90s, and that his overselling was part of that character. But the backlash made him rethink everything. Even when I try to play the villain, people assume that's who I really am, Shawn reflected. Things got out of hand, to the point where I knew I couldn't play that role anymore. I did what used to work for me, but people saw it as me deliberately ruining the match. Whatever Michaels' true intentions, one thing is certain. Shawn Michaels vs. Hulk Hogan remains one of the most unforgettable matches in WWE history, but for all the wrong reasons. A clash between two icons that could have become a legendary milestone was instead overshadowed by ego, resentment, and one of the most exaggerated performances ever seen in a wrestling ring. Bret Hart and Vince McMahon, the earthquake called the Montreal Screwjob. No wrestling fan can ever forget that fateful night at Survivor Series 1997, when the match between Bret, the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels turned into one of the most controversial moments in WWE history. Behind the chaos was a deep-seated conflict between Bret Hart and WWE Chairman Vince McMahon, an intense rift that led to what became famously known as the Montreal Screwjob. At the time, Bret Hart was the reigning WWF champion and preparing to leave the company to join WCW. He had only one request: not to lose the title in his home country of Canada, at least not before officially departing from WWE. Fearing Bret might appear on WCW television with the WWF Championship, Vince McMahon secretly devised a plan to betray him, live, on national television. During the match, Shawn Michaels locked Bret into the sharpshooter, Bret's signature move. Referee Earl Hebner immediately called for the bell, signaling the end of the match, even though Bret had not submitted. The audience was left stunned, unsure of what had just transpired. In that instant, Bret's expression turned into pure rage. Unable to hold back his fury, he spat directly in Vince McMahon's face, an unprecedented act on WWE programming. But it didn't end there. Bret jumped out of the ring, flipped over the announcer's table in anger, destroyed broadcast equipment, and then raised his hand to write WCW in the air as a defiant message before storming out of the arena to a chorus of chaos and confusion. Fans were left in shock, and the media buzzed non-stop. What should have been a triumphant farewell became a deep scar in the hearts of fans and a dark chapter in WWE history. The incident didn't just leave Bret Hart betrayed, it shook fans' trust in the very professionalism of WWE. This wasn't just a failed match, it was a symbolic act of betrayal that sent shockwaves through the entire wrestling world. Owen Hart and Mick Foley, when two pranksters teamed up to ruin a match. In the world of WWE, where high-octane action and dramatic storytelling take center stage, the idea of two superstars deliberately sabotaging a match sounds almost unthinkable. But for Owen Hart and Mick Foley, it wasn't just a wild idea, it was a mission they eagerly took on. Their target? None other than Dave Meltzer, the influential journalist behind the Wrestling Observer newsletter. The whole thing started when Mick and Owen learned that Meltzer would be attending a show in San Jose. Instantly, the two cooked up a plan. They would put on the worst wrestling match of all time, a deliberately awful performance that, if rated, would earn a -5 stars. Both men were so talented that they could have a decent match with a broomstick, so pretending to be bad was a hilarious and oddly exciting challenge. Owen Hart, often dubbed the unofficial prince of backstage pranks, was the mastermind. He once tricked Ahmed Johnson into thinking he was booked on The Tonight Show, and even snuck laxatives into Yokozuna's food, laughing uncontrollably when the big man had to dash to the airplane bathroom mid-flight. Pulling off something like this? Just another day at the office for Owen. Mick Foley, who later recounted the whole escapade in his autobiography Have a Nice Day, was just as thrilled. Even Stone Cold Steve Austin, who served as the special guest referee, joined in on the prank, turning the match into an all-out comedy spectacle. In the ring, they went all in on the ridiculousness. At one point, they started hitting each other with bags of popcorn. Owen even lay on the mat flailing around, making popcorn angels like he was playing in snow. It was an intentionally absurd performance that threw wrestling logic completely out the window. Ironically, Dave Meltzer didn't hate it. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the bizarre display. Their attempt to create a disaster piece had completely failed, but in the funniest way imaginable. Unfortunately, the match was never recorded. Had it been, it might have become a legend in its own right, not because of its technical quality, but because of the sheer brilliance and mischief of two gifted wrestlers who knew exactly how to have fun and leave their mark. Ric Flair versus Bret Hart, when two legends couldn't see eye to eye. In the world of professional wrestling, clashes between top stars are not uncommon. But the tension between Bret, the Hitman Hart, and Nature Boy Ric Flair ran so deep that it turned what should have been monumental matches into lifeless, disjointed performances that lacked emotion and chemistry. Bret Hart never hid his disappointment when it came to Ric Flair. In his autobiography The Best There Is, The Best There Was, and The Best There Ever Will Be, Bret admitted he was once thrilled at the prospect of facing the legendary Flair, a man hailed by fans and critics alike as one of the greatest of all time. But reality didn't match the hype. According to Bret, Flair was a formulaic performer, executing the same routine night after night, regardless of his opponent. Flair insisted on controlling every aspect of the match, leaving Bret with little to no creative input. For Hart, this led to matches that felt disconnected, devoid of spirit, and ultimately soulless. When Bret took the championship from Flair, he hoped the two could create unforgettable matches. Instead, what followed were uninspired bouts lacking spark. Bret claimed Flair not only refused to collaborate but often botched counters and match finishes. He suspected these were not mere accidents, but deliberate attempts to sabotage him in the ring. "I started calling Ric's style all energy, no soul," Bret wrote. He believed Flair wrestled on impulse, abandoning logical pacing in favor of showy sequences. Though Flair was undeniably skilled, Bret felt he lacked the ability to build a match's rhythm, leaving Hart confused as to why fans continued to idolize him so blindly. On the flip side, Flair had little praise for Bret. In interviews and his own memoirs, he openly stated that he didn't see Hart as a commercial draw. In Flair's view, Bret had solid technical ability but lacked charisma and couldn't connect with audiences through promos, something Flair believed was essential for any company's top star. Flair even mocked Bret, suggesting he loved himself so much he could be the president of his own fan club. He accused Bret of being overly rigid, stuck in repetitive match structures. Whenever Flair tried to improvise, like throwing in a signature chop, Bret would reportedly push back, insisting everything follow his exact blueprint. Though Flair admitted Bret could deliver great matches, he felt it only happened when Bret was emotionally invested. Most of the time, Flair saw him as too stiff, too serious, and unwilling to adapt during regular shows. Their relationship notably soured in the early 90s. Bret once publicly called Flair overrated, a bold statement that stunned fans. He also speculated that Flair may have intentionally tanked their matches due to unresolved backstage tension. Frustrated by the declining match quality, Bret eventually went to Vince McMahon directly. According to Bret, Vince encouraged him to assert himself, reminding him he was the champion now. Soon after, Bret stood before the locker room and declared, "I'm the champion now." He believed Flair never forgot that moment, and from then on, their bond only worsened. Though Flair later admitted he didn't have great matches with Bret, he cited personal struggles at the time, claiming he was battling depression and mental burnout. Still, most insiders believed the root issue was the clashing egos of two proud veterans who refused to yield ground. Bret and Flair are both icons, undeniable pillars in wrestling history. But sometimes, skill alone isn't enough. Not every dream matchup leads to magic. In this case, what could have been legendary instead became a reminder. Even in wrestling, greatness often requires a little humility and a willingness to meet halfway. Hulk Hogan versus Kevin Nash, the finger poke of doom. Yes, it's Hulk Hogan again. And this time, he wasn't alone. Alongside him in one of the most disappointing moments in WCW history was Kevin Nash, and together, they delivered a match that remains a notorious stain on professional wrestling to this day. The year was 1999, and WCW was deep in turmoil. In a desperate bid to regain viewer interest, the company booked a world title showdown between Hogan and Nash, a bout that seemed destined to be a blockbuster clash. Instead, it turned into an infamous farce. On WCW Monday Nitro, as thousands of fans eagerly anticipated a hard-hitting battle, Hogan suddenly extended one finger and lightly poked Nash in the chest. Nash theatrically collapsed to the mat as if knocked out cold, allowing Hogan to casually cover him for the 1-2-3 and become the new champion. That moment became known as the finger poke of doom, a move that may have looked like a joke but instantly stripped the WCW World Championship of all meaning. Fans were stunned into silence, and WCW's credibility took a blow from which it would never fully recover. Goldberg did rush out afterward to spark a chaotic brawl, but the damage was already done. What was once a symbol of honor and glory had now become nothing more than a prop in a ridiculous skit, leaving fans disillusioned and fed up. The finger poke of doom wasn't just a bad creative decision, it was a turning point that marked the beginning of WCW's downward spiral. Dean Ambrose versus Brock Lesnar, when a match was abandoned from within. Love him or hate him, one thing's undeniable. Brock Lesnar is one of the most intimidating forces in the wrestling world. But the opposite is also true. When Brock doesn't care about a match, fans can tell instantly. And that's exactly what happened when Dean Ambrose faced Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 32. On paper, it was a clash of opposites. Ambrose, the reckless wild card, going toe-to-toe with the unstoppable beast, Lesnar. Fans were expecting chaos, violence, and a hardcore showdown worthy of the WrestleMania stage. But what they got instead was a flat, forgettable performance that faded from memory the moment it ended. Jon Moxley, Dean Ambrose's real name, would later speak candidly about what went on behind the scenes. In an interview with Wade Keller, he revealed that Brock Lesnar showed little interest in the match, and neither the writing team nor Vince McMahon seemed to care much either. Moxley said he pitched dozens of wild, over-the-top hardcore spots to make the match stand out, but nobody was listening. "I wanted to create something truly special," Moxley recalled. "I was ready to give everything. My body, my pride. I didn't want to hurt Brock. I just wanted to take the most punishment in WWE history. If he smashed me into pieces in that ring, that'd be fine. I would have become a legend." According to him, in the weeks leading up to WrestleMania, Brock barely showed up to rehearse or discuss the match. Moxley was left on his own, scrambling to come up with ideas, desperate to make the bout memorable. But in the end, none of those ideas saw the light of day. Later, Moxley publicly called Lesnar lazy. While Brock never responded directly, his advocate Paul Heyman did. Heyman claimed Moxley was the one with the attitude problem and defended Lesnar's professionalism. Whether Brock intentionally sabotaged the match or was simply indifferent remains unclear. But one thing's for sure, he didn't give it his all. And when one half of a match checks out mentally, there's no way the result can shine. Dean Ambrose and Brock Lesnar had the potential to deliver one of the wildest, most violent, unforgettable showdowns in WrestleMania history. But instead of creating a legacy moment, they left behind an empty shell of a match, one that fans remember not for its chaos, but for what it could have been. Jeff Hardy vs. Sting, when addiction brought a match crashing down. Jeff Hardy, known for his fearless high-flying style, has long been a fan favorite in the wrestling world. But behind the charisma and daring moves lies a darker past, marked by a long, painful battle with drugs and alcohol. That struggle reached its lowest point during the infamous match between Jeff Hardy and Sting at Victory Road 2011. A moment so surreal, it left the entire wrestling world stunned and disappointed. The warning signs were clear the moment Jeff stepped onto the stage. Gone was the focused, energetic Hardy fans were used to. Instead, he stumbled down the ramp, his eyes glassy, his demeanor erratic. Something was obviously wrong. Backstage, the situation escalated quickly. Eric Bischoff had to rush to the ring and quietly change the entire match plan just seconds before the opening bell rang. What followed wasn't a match, it was a collapse. Jeff entered the ring sluggishly, tossing his shirt on the ground instead of handing it to a fan like he usually did. Less than 2 minutes in, Sting hit the Scorpion Death Drop and pinned Hardy in just 90 seconds. The audience erupted, not in cheers, but in angry chants of bullshit. The disbelief was palpable. Sting, clearly frustrated, couldn't hide his disappointment. After the match, he simply shook his head and sighed, "I know," a quiet, heartbreaking acknowledgement of what had just unfolded. What should have been a world title showdown turned into an awkward and painful spectacle. The most troubling part? This wasn't the first time Jeff had entered the ring in such a condition. At Final Resolution, he was reportedly so intoxicated that he nearly had his championship stripped. In another match, a botched chair shot, caused by his lack of awareness, led to a concussion for Ken Anderson. Warnings about Jeff's condition had been voiced before, but TNA turned a blind eye, putting others at risk in the process. Thankfully, Jeff Hardy seems to have turned a corner in recent years. Now competing in TNA's tag team division, his life appears to be back on track. While his past is marred by serious missteps, his recovery is a testament to resilience, that no matter how deep you fall, there's always a chance to rise again and start over. Hulk Hogan vs. Jeff Jarrett, when ego killed the match. If there's one golden rule in professional wrestling, it's this: never let Hulk Hogan have full creative control. WCW broke that rule, and paid the price with one of the most disastrous moments in wrestling history. At the time, Jeff Jarrett was the reigning WCW World Heavyweight Champion. The original plan was simple and logical. Jarrett would defeat Hulk Hogan, helping elevate the next generation of stars. But Hogan, fueled by an oversized ego and a long-standing refusal to do the job, refused to lose. He manipulated the storyline, bending it to his will. The result? A train wreck aired live on pay-per-view. At Bash at the Beach 2000, as soon as the bell rang, Jeff Jarrett laid down flat in the middle of the ring. No moves, no action. He simply stretched out, silently mocking the entire situation. Hogan stood there confused, then reluctantly placed his foot on Jarrett to get the 3 count. He won the match, but it meant absolutely nothing. Backstage figure Vince Russo didn't stay quiet. Moments later, he stormed out with a microphone and unleashed a furious, scathing shoot promo aimed directly at Hogan. Russo accused him of manipulating the system, always putting himself above the company, and then declared that this would be the last time Hogan ever appeared in WCW. To salvage the night, Russo immediately booked a real main event. Jeff Jarrett vs. Booker T. Booker went on to win the title in what should have been a career-defining moment. But that triumph was completely overshadowed by the circus act that had taken place earlier. WCW was already on life support, and instead of using a major title match to breathe new life into the brand, they let backstage politics poison everything. Shoot angles, where real-life conflict is blended into the storyline, can be powerful tools when used subtly. But this wasn't subtle. It was a blunt force betrayal of the audience's trust. The magic of pro wrestling lies in fans believing in the story. That night, WCW stripped all of it away. Bash at the Beach 2000 should have belonged to Booker T, but instead, it became the clearest symbol of a crumbling empire brought down by unchecked egos. Bruiser Brody, when a legend sabotaged a match with indifference. In the world of professional wrestling, Where strange stories are the norm, Bruiser Brody stood out as a unique and unpredictable force. More than just a fierce icon, Brody was infamous for his tendency to ignore scripts and play by his own rules. Fans who watched his brutal brawls with names like the Sheik or the Funk Brothers will always remember his wild, intense, and untamed persona. But beyond those legendary battles, Brody was also at the center of many controversies, especially for his frequent refusal to sell his opponent's offense. Over time, that defiance became a signature trait of his in-ring style. Yet Brody didn't stop at just no selling. He would go as far as to completely destroy the planned finish, and sometimes simply refuse to lose, if he wasn't feeling it. One of the most infamous examples of this happened in 1987, during a steel cage match against Lex Luger in Florida. Luger, a rising star at the time, was set to face off with the veteran Brody. Everything started normally, until Luger threw a punch, and Brody didn't react. No stumble, no flinch, he didn't even blink. With every strike that followed, Brody stood there like a statue. Luger, still green and inexperienced in handling unscripted chaos, began to panic. In front of a packed arena, he fumbled through the match while Brody barely acknowledged his presence. After several minutes of confusion, the referee was forced to call an abrupt end to the match, declaring a disqualification, an awkward escape from a situation no one knew how to resolve. Backstage, a bewildered Luger confronted Brody to ask what had gone wrong. Surprisingly, Brody casually apologized. When asked why he no-sold the entire match, his answer was blunt, "I was tired, just wasn't feeling it tonight." That nonchalant response raised eyebrows. According to others, including Ted DiBiase, the truth was more personal. Brody didn't respect Luger. He reportedly believed a young up-and-comer like Luger hadn't earned the right to call spots backstage, something traditionally reserved for seasoned veterans. Whatever the real reason, the match became a black mark on both men's careers. What should have been a breakthrough moment for Luger turned into a bitter lesson in the unforgiving backstage politics of professional wrestling. Earthquake vs. Cooji Kitao, when the ring became a battleground of rage. Back in 1991, WWE partnered with Super World of Sports to co-host a special event called WrestleDream, held on April 1st. The pay-per-view featured a lineup of high-quality matches, giving fans thrilling showdowns like Bret Hart vs. George Takano and a marquee bout between Hulk Hogan and Yoshiaki Yatsu for the WWE Championship. But ironically, the most talked-about match from that night wasn't a classic, it was a total meltdown. The chaotic clash between Earthquake and Cooji Kitao gained notoriety not for its technical brilliance, but for the complete breakdown of professionalism inside the ring. Though the two had previously faced off without incident, things unraveled fast in their rematch. Cooji, seemingly uninterested in wrestling a real match, lost his temper early. He hurled the announcer's table into the ring area, immediately shifting the atmosphere from competitive to hostile. From that point forward, the match fell apart. The two barely engaged, circling the ring and half-heartedly slapping each other's hands. Earthquake's frustration was written all over his face, and at one point, he shouted, "This is supposed to be professional wrestling." A desperate plea in the middle of a match that had gone completely off-script. Then came the breaking point. Cooji suddenly kicked the referee, resulting in an immediate disqualification. But he wasn't done. Grabbing a microphone, he began cursing live on air, calling wrestling fake, and walked out without a second glance. Cooji Kitao already had a reputation for being undisciplined. He'd been fired from New Japan Pro Wrestling and permanently banned from the world of sumo. But his behavior at WrestleDream cemented that negative image even further. What could have been a competitive contest was destroyed, tossed aside by ego and raw resentment. It wasn't just a match gone wrong, it was a public implosion that revealed what happens when personal issues override the very spirit of sports entertainment. Which incident shocked you the most? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any other explosive stories. Only here on Wrestling Sphere.